I'm Dwyer Astaphan.
I am Earl Clarke.
Today is Sunday, the 10th of June, 2007. A special day for you, Earl?
Yes, 40 years ago, 1967, the intended overthrow of the Bratcher's government by the People's Action Movement, Anguillians, and American mercenaries.
Earl, I was listening yesterday to a radio program in St. Kitts here, and one of the panelists was an official of the People's Action Movement.
Dr. Warner?
Exactly. And he said that from a document he was reading, the plan to invade and overthrow the Bratcher government was hatched in a pub in England in 1960. And he said that the People's Action Movement was established in 1965. So he wanted to make the point that the plan having been hatched in 1960 and the People's Action Movement having been established 5 years later meant that the People's Action Movement could not be involved in the attempt. You have a response to that?
Yeah, I don't agree with Dr. Warner at all. The plan could have been hatched in 1967 and executed the plan could have been hatched in 1960 in England and executed in 1967. There always has to be a planning period. And in 1965, PAM came on the scene. But you see, if you hatch a plan to overthrow a government, you must have something in place to take the place of the government you overthrow. So that is why PAM came into existence, to take over as the government.
Now, Earl, I have in front of me a copy of the Democrat newspaper, which was published on Saturday, June the 10th, 1967. And there is something here which says, Freedom Day.
Freedom Day.
The Waterfront, Airport and Manual Workers Union hereby declare Monday, 12th of June, 1967 as Freedom Day. Now, just to pause and let everybody know, the 10th of June, 1967 was the day on which we celebrated the Queen's birthday. In those days, we celebrated the Queen's birthday. Yes. It would have been a public holiday.
Yes.
The paper for the 10th of June, the Democrat in those days, used to come out on a Saturday. So it was dated the Saturday, but in fact, it came out on Friday.
On the Friday.
Good.
Right.
So that paper for that weekend was issued on the Friday, carrying the date of the following day, the Saturday. But it contained in it an advert or a notice saying, Freedom Day, the Waterfront, Airport and Manual Workers Union hereby declare Monday, 12th June 1967 as Freedom Day, on which all persons are requested not to work. This is a protest against our present curtailment of freedom as a show of no confidence in the present government and in sympathy with the Anguillans. And at the bottom it says, let freedom ring. Now, before I ask you a question, Earl, on this, I want also to refer to a magazine of the People's Action Movement dated February 1990. At page 18, the book is written in 2 columns on each page. And on the second column on that page, the second to last paragraph, and I quote, the labor regime accused the business community of importing arms and aiding and abetting the opposition, which was then the People's Action Movement. In the House of Assembly, Bratcher referred to the document from employers. So there was a document that was being circulated by the employers. And Bratcher referred to that document, which gave an undertaking to the unions that no disciplinary action would be taken against employees who absented themselves from work on Freedom Day. In other words, we look in the Democrat for the issue of the 10th of June, 1967, announcing that Monday would be Freedom Day and calling upon the workers of the country not to go to work.
And getting the assurance of the employers that any worker who took part in that demonstration would not be penalized.
And the magazine from the People's Action Movement, which is a February 1990 magazine, refers to that instant and refers to the then Premier Bradshaw, referring to that document in which the employers were giving an excuse, a pass, if you will, to all employees who absented themselves on Monday, which the Democrat and the workers, the union, WAM I think they used to call it, associated with the Democrat and with the People's Action Movement, announcing would be Freedom Day. Now, what do you get from these two documents? The notice in the Democrat of Saturday, 10th of June, 1967, telling the country, Monday is Freedom Day, don't bother work. We're going to take that day to protest against the curtailment of freedom in the country as a show of no confidence in the government and in sympathy with the Anguillians. And then the pardon given way ahead of time to the workers. If you don't come to work on Monday, it's okay, you'll be fine. What do you draw from that?
What I draw from that is that everything was planned. In 1967 attempted overthrow, then they expected it to be successful because Dr. Herbert had given the Anguillians the information or the assurance that they have the support, the full backing of the majority of people in St. Kitts concerning this intended overthrow. And so they visualized that it would be successful. And so they wanted to Monday, Freedom Day, to be the celebration day after the attempted overthrow, if the attempted overthrow was successful.
So far in our conversation, we have not alluded to any concrete evidence of the overthrow. We're moving in that direction, I would presume. But before I go there, one of the things that the People's Action Movement has been saying over the years is that people were locked up unfairly. Nobody was convicted. Bradshaw discontinued the trials. In fact, the people who had been locked up after PAM came into power in 1980 were compensated for false imprisonment. And their conclusion, which they are drawing for the country to buy into, is that if nobody was convicted, then nobody was guilty. It is important for us as a people to understand our history and understand that where we are today is as a result of steps taken, events and developments and effort. Sometimes good and sometimes not so good. But today is the result of all of the yesterdays. And whereas today, a vendor off the street, a nuts lady or whoever can be a juror, back in those days, the ordinary man and woman, the average man and woman on the street could not be a juror. So immediately, it really, although we used to try to speak about practicing the jury system on the principles which were brought down to us from England, people being tried by their peers. The truth of the matter is, well, perhaps the perpetrators or the accused in those trials in 1967 were in fact being tried by their peers, who were landed people and people who were better off. But the average man and woman in St. Kitts had absolutely no say in the dispensation of justice in those matters. Not only that, witnesses, I mean, you hear people talk of one particular witnesses who fainted 3 times in the witness stand. So great was the pressure on witnesses to do whatever it is they were being asked to do. And so it led to the point where Mr. Bradshaw decided that this thing really was headed nowhere. Justice was being thwarted, and he pulled the prosecutions away. But I want to make this point on the outcome of a trial, which some people conveniently would want to rely on as conclusive evidence of innocence. I want to cite a case, the case which was brought against a young man who is now deceased called Grizzly Lawrence. Grizzly Lawrence was charged with the murder of police officer Jude Matthew. The jury was hung every time. They could not find him guilty. Notwithstanding the processes, the judicial processes that unfolded 3 times in that Lawrence case. And you will also recall, Earl, that the laws were even changed, because prior to that, I think 2 hung juries meant the person would have to be acquitted. It was extended to a 3rd, and still the young man could not be found guilty. He later met his death in a very tragic way. Notwithstanding that process, there are people who referred on the 1967 trials, relied on the outcome of the 1967 trials to conclude, perhaps for themselves, but definitely for the public, that the people who had been brought before the court in 1967 were innocent. But Grizzly Lawrence, though acquitted, was guilty. Indeed, notwithstanding the evidence that one of them brought to the court, a senior person in PAM, saying that Grizzly had shot guns in the direction of that particular person. And that particular person's evidence was not found acceptable or credible to the jury. So Grizzly Lawrence found innocent but still deemed guilty by PAM. Billy Herbert and all of them, the cases did not proceed, and on the basis of that they conclude, and I don't think it is for themselves, I think it's for public consumption, that those men were innocent. Well, it is not for me to say guilty or not, but I think we need to be consistent, because the inconsistencies are the things that erode our credibility. Now, I want to move on from there, Earl.
But there's one point I would like to make. Nothing bad happens in life, because it is out of that 1967 trial that ordinary people became jurors. Out of that 67 trials and the failure of the trials, that Mr. Bradshaw went into the House of Assembly and passed laws saying that anybody, as long as you're on the voters list, could be a juror. And you know something? The Democrat printed articles condemning the move, saying that those people are illiterate. What do they know about law? And up to now, nobody has been condemned, brought in guilty when they're not guilty. All the judges have been favorable with the decisions given by the jurors.
And it's important, the point you just made, because at the time, not only did the then Labour government change the law with regard to jury duty, hooking it into the voters list, which was of course expanding, because not long before that you weren't able to vote unless you made a certain amount of money. That's only 1952. Right. But around that time, you saw a social revolution taking place in the country. The health system with the Jean France Hospital, the comprehensivization of the education system, the opening up of Frigate Bay and the beginning of the tourist industry, which again found great condemnation by the People's Action Movement, who were condemning the government for taking Mr. Wigley's land. When Mr. Bradshaw shouted passionately and purposefully, as far as I'm concerned, that there were 12 families in the country that basically control 99% of the land. And we see the results of Frigate Bay today. And also at the same time, Earl, very significant point in our history, the broadening of the economic base of the country by diversifying into light manufacturing, late 60s, early 70s. So a lot of things happened around that time, and our people need to know and reflect on these things. But we now back to the 10th of June, Earl. The continuing refrain from the People's Action Movement that this thing is a concoction by the Labour Party. It never happened. Now we're hearing a sort of concession from Pam saying that if it happened really, it was hatched in a pub in England. I understand Billy Herbert was in England in 1960.
Yes, as a student.
So he could have been in the pub at the time. I'm not saying he was or he wasn't. But the nonsense of that argument, I think, speaks for itself. So I won't really delve into that. The thing is, they are saying it never happened. In fact, they are supposed to be having a public meeting at this moment as we speak to tell the country that after this public meeting that they're having tonight is finished, nobody will ever call Pam's name in the 10th of June 1967 attempted overthrow. Now, there's only one truth in life, Earl. You can't have yours and I have mine.